Pebeahsy, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon. It is Emily Washings here with War Cry Podcast and the team, as well as a guest. Today, we're going to be talking about MMIW and MMIP and probate. And our intent today is to learn about probate and the Bureau of Indian Affairs as it pertains to Natives and in particular missing and murdered Indigenous people. Now, this can be a sensitive topic for some, as it obviously can bring up past things that have come up with regards to loss. We have a special guest here to talk about some of those steps and process, just to be in a level of give information. We can often, when we're in a state of loss, it's very hard to be able to follow a lot of different steps that pertain to things that need to get done. So our intention today is to clear up confusion and be informative about this information. So I want to officially open this with a welcome to this episode of War Cry Podcast, Season 2, Episode 3. We are an all Native run podcast discussing data, events, stories, issues, and historical connections about Northwest missing and murdered Natives. Thank you for joining us for this episode. My name is Emily Washings, and co-hosts today are Patsy Whitefoot, Robin Pebeahsy, and Lucy Smartlout. And our guest today is Nichole Pebeahsy. I also want to begin with just an opening about what the Bureau of Indian Affairs is as it relates to probate. And then we'll turn it over to Nicole to introduce herself. So the source that I'm reading from is the Bureau of Indian Affairs.gov. The primary mission of the Division of Probate is to compile inventories of Indian trust assets and family information and to coordinate the timely distribution of trust assets. With the Office of Hearings and Appeals, Land Titles, and Records Office, and the Office of the Special Trustee. Now, as you can tell, that is very wordy, very technical information. And so that's why I'm so happy to have our guests, along with our team, is so happy to have our guest here today to kind of explain a little bit about why is the federal government involved in, holdings and who, how things get transferred down. So Nicole, I'll turn it over to you to be introduced. Introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Nichole Pebeahsy. I'm actually Robin's little sister. And I work for the Division of Probate. I've had about 4 years of experience doing this. And when I started here, I had no idea what probate was, or even how the flow of things were connected, and all the different offices through the Bureau of Indian Affairs have a hand in dividing land and individual Indian monies connected to that land for members. And I did want to pull up or state the definition of an Indian through APRA, which is the American Indian Probate Reform Act of 2006. An Indian is a lineal descendant within 2 degrees. And so that means an enrolled member, if they have children that aren't enrolled, so like their children and their grandchildren would be within 2 degrees. So they're still considered an Indian through APRA in the Bureau of Indian Affairs. But I guess I also do have a connection with MMIP and MMIW. My grandmother on my father's side was actually a victim of MMIW in the early 50s. My dad was a very young child, about 5 years old, when he lost his mother. They never really figured out how she died, but she was considered murdered on her death certificate. And I guess that's why I follow your guys' podcast myself, and any kind of movement that has to do with MMIW, MMIP, because it does hit home for myself and for my sister Robin and my two other sisters, and my extended relatives. But I'm glad to be here today, and I hope I can answer your guys' questions the best I can.
Yeah, so I'm so sorry to hear that heaviness, come from your family, that your family carries, and that, you do your best to be informed. I think out of all the people that we know outside of this podcast, you're somebody that follows a lot of true crime podcasts and
Hmm.
cases. And,
Yeah.
we value as a real resource. I mean, if there's a podcast that we need to know about that has to do with true crime or MMIP, I will turn to Nicole's Facebook to see what she shared.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but it does bring a lot more to it when you have such a personal connection to these. And I'm wondering, I don't know if we're going to go into the questions specifically yet, but I know that you had wanted to talk about what happens when somebody goes missing and they have what's called trust land. And maybe just explain a
Okay.
little bit about what trust land is. Like, what does that even mean for our non-native audience?
Okay. So probate is basically, um, you know, someone who passes away, a Native American that passes away, and they have heirs, like their children, their grandchildren, or if they don't have children, it could be their siblings, or if they do a will, um, they can pass down their land holdings to those people. And what trust land is, I always compare it to stocks. Like, so you buy a stock and you own a share in it. So there could be like a 80-acre allotment in my name, but I only own a share. I don't own the whole 80 acres. I own like 1/4 or one third. I own a share along with other people with an undivided interest. So it just means that it's not broken up into sections. We all own a share. We all receive profit from like grazing income, or like orchards or stuff like that. Where I currently hold land in Oklahoma from my father, it's oil and gas. So the minerals that are connected to the land, I receive compensation from them using the shares, um, using my shares of the allotment and stuff like that. So going back to when trust land was divided, it um, is basically when the government came along and gave each person within a reservation an allotment. Like, you can have this 80 acres right here to build your home, like make crops, like grow corn, raise cattle. And so from that, they were called original allottees. They were the original person to receive that allotment. And from then on, their children and their children, and even now it's like their great great grandchildren that are still connected to that land from that original allottee back in, like, during treaty signings and stuff like that. Um, so with that being said, every every case is different. Every person who owns land has a different situation, and every case it's almost like putting a puzzle together. You have to look at the bigger picture, like, okay, so did they have a will? Do they have lineal descendants? Do they have siblings? Do they have parents? Depending on, doesn't matter what age you are, there's always going to be um, a route we have to take to pass on your land. And sometimes it doesn't even go that far. It goes back to the tribe. If you have no lineal descendants, if you don't have, um, you know, I guess it's like you don't have enough land to pass down. And I guess it's just every situation's different. I'm sorry to make it more confusing, but talking about people who go missing, or victims of, being a homicide victim. And I guess from my experience working in probate for the last 4 years, I've done quite a few probates where there is someone victim of homicide. And these cases honestly get held up because of the situation, the criminal situation on these cases. Like for instance, if someone was murdered and they don't know who murdered them, they don't have anyone in custody, there is no way we can prove that the probable heirs to their estate had anything to do with it. So with that being said, we cannot move forward unless we can rule them out. And missing,
Yeah.
on the case of missing people, there's the situation of, proving that they aren't out there. Like there's 7 years presumptual death. Like that the families literally have to wait 7 years to rule that out, to rule, all right, that no one has made contact with them for 7 years or even longer. No one's seen them, heard from them. And they just have to wait that long. And then the coroner, depending on where you are, I believe it's the same everywhere, but the coroner of your county has to, all right, this is the evidence that we've been presented with, that no one has seen this person, so we have to do a death certificate for a presumptive death. And once we get that in our office, or even the tribe notifies a probate office, we have to, then we can finally start their case. And it's basically the same thing. Like we have to rule out the family, and it's just a big circle sometimes. But it's good to try to work with, or well, I guess from talking from my experience, I try to work with the county prosecutors or county coroners or county sheriff's office, tribal police, to get these reports and find out the knowledge that they have, so we can move forward and help these families that, they don't know where to start. And sometimes they won't release information like this to families because there's still an open case. They haven't closed the case because it goes cold, and it just sits and sits and sits until someone actually solves it, or sometimes it doesn't get solved, sadly.
Yeah, there's such a level of complexity in all of the different cases. I think that, those of us that are familiar with the process can, sympathize with that position and, trying to talk in generalities about things. Oftentimes when you've gone through probate, there's things that are 1 or 2 years later that you didn't even know about or came up, and you're having to deal with it. I want to turn
Yes.
to my co-host, Robin, to ask a question. And maybe, get a little bit more information about this probate and MMIP.
Okay.
Robin, you're on mute.
Thank you very much. So, hi, Nicole. Good to see you.
Hi.
My little sister.
I know.
No, I'm so glad you came on. And yes, this is something that we are definitely connected with. And I think Patsy had said in one of her interviews, it's like, it's not a club that people want to be a part of. And that was something that really resonated with me, because, in terms of like our family experience, that happened before we were born. And it was definitely a different time. So, with that in mind, thinking about perhaps the processes that our family would had to have gone through back in the 50s. I guess the kind of like a more simpler thing, maybe a two-part, is like, one, I'd like to hear a little bit about your experiences in your job, just as somebody who works with the community. You had talked about seeing the historical and familial ties of people who come in, and how you just kind of get to see a little bit of the backstage of all of that. But also just what do you wish you knew before you got started, you know, working in probate?
I guess my one of my favorite experiences working in probate is actually reading a lot of history, like family history and literal in cases that set precedents throughout Indian country. And you read those cases and you see how much Indian families have fought for the right to be present and acknowledge, or in, you know, given knowledge about land and what they can inherit. And instead of just having it pushed through, there are a lot of cases that I've read that are inspiring, you know, that Native people are strong, that we don't take no for an answer. We want to know, that's our right. And again, going back to when our father experienced losing his mother, our grandma, back then, I've noticed a lot of the government didn't hire Native Americans to work within these offices for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And it was literally just pushed through, like just another case. It didn't matter if they were a victim of homicide or they were missing. A lot of it was just, all right, here's another case, push it through, hand down the land to their children or whoever. And there's a lot of different laws from different like eras, I guess, how probate has changed and molded, and how the Bureau of Indian Affairs has tried to help keep land within families or within Indian country, instead of, you know, just going back to the government or losing it or, you know, selling it. And a lot of that has to go back to Cobell, the Cobell settlement, and what Eloise Cobell has done for the country, for Indian country, and that's really inspiring. One thing I wish I learned coming into probate was all the reading, all of the reading and self knowledge that I had to pick up on my own, and the ability to like acknowledge the hurt in families when they come in here. You can't talk to people as if they're just another case on my desk. They're a family and this is their loved one, because I've lost people myself, and it's hard. And especially when someone is murdered or missing, it's even twice as hard. It's twice as hard to help those families, and you have to have compassion. No one told me, you know, open your heart and open your mind to helping families. It doesn't matter who they are, if you know them or not. That's one thing I did learn on my own, was to have more compassion and to be more grounded with the Native community here, and also trying to acknowledge the family ties between this community or within your local Indian community, how everyone's tied together. This is so and so and they're related to so and so, and it just goes on and on and on. But that's one thing I really did like coming in here, is the history of our people is tied through our land, and our lineage is tied through our land.
Did you want to respond to that, Robin?
No, just I'm really glad to hear that, and I'm really glad to hear that that's, you know, something that also is not taught in colleges or schools or any kind of institution, on how to deal with those situations. And I just want to say I'm so proud of you, my little sister. You know, you do so much for
Thank
your
you.
community.
Thank
We call her
you.
the baby. I'm gonna say here live. It's like she's
Yeah.
the baby. It was like I
Oh
just always
no.
I'm so proud of her and like
I
all the
own
work
it.
she does and the work because I do see people in the community and you know they said, oh, you're Nicole helped or anything like that. It just makes me really proud. Thank you. And I'm glad that you take everything in a good way because I know it is like Patsy had said before we started recording, it's heavy, and it's sensitive. And
Yeah,
thank you.
it is. It is.
The people are tied to the land and you're tied to the people. Let's turn to Lucy for her question.
Hi, Nicole. So,
Hi.
thank you for sharing and being here. I do
Yeah.
have a response in regards to what you were talking about earlier, just really quickly. And I just want to make sure that I'm understanding correctly that the burden of responsibility is primarily on the families. Is that what I'm hearing to show that their individual or their loved one is missing? And so during that 7 years, when they don't know what's happening with that individual, they're responsible for everything that's happening. Like they're responsible for like obtaining the reports and they're responsible for, tracking when the last contact or the last view, sighting of them was, or, is that, I'm understanding that correctly?
Nicole, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. I got disconnected. But going back to that about missing individuals, I would have to say yes, but also they because personally my like where I work, I can't help anyone until they are considered until I receive a death notice.
Mm.
Like an official death notice or some kind of like death certificate or something like that. But one thing I do encourage families to do is document, ask like, all right, um, it's year 2021. They've been missing 4 or 5 months, still haven't heard anything. Even just monthly, showing that, you are making an active effort to try and locate them or working with your local police department or the even going as far as like tribal police and maybe even the federal Bureau of Investigation, um, or even asking family and friends, hey, have you seen them? Have you heard from them? And it, like even just documentation, like journaling, I believe that will also help bring your case forward when you do have to ask for a presumptive death. Um, and it's hard to even just think about it that constantly because I know some people just try not to think about it for a while because it's hard enough. They worry enough and they don't want. That's one thing I've noticed some Native people do is they just put it away for a while because it's too hard to think about, and it is. Um, I also believe counseling helps a lot too, or trying to find a caseworker through DSHS, I believe, would also help. Because they track health records and stuff like that also.
Well, that's actually a really perfect segue into my next question. And you had mentioned some of them already, like the FBI, our DSHS caseworkers. So what are some other national organizations or programs that people should be aware of while they're going through this process?
I encourage people to go see the Northwest Justice System. They actually do help a lot of individuals. They also do wills for people. Well, free for elders, but they also do wills for everyone else. But I do encourage people to try to reach out to them if and what they suggest, because I bet they have their own ties and connections on how to help people with this situation.
Great. Thank you, Nicole.
Yeah.
I really love the helpful information and insight about documentation that you had regarding families, and even, you know, all the information about presumptive death. You know, it's very hard information to hear, and I'm sure an even harder process to go through. I want to turn it to Patsy for her either question or insight as she has gone through this process.
Yeah.
And Patsy, you're on mute.
Thank you very much. And I'm so pleased that you're here, Nicole. Wonderful information that you're sharing with us to build the awareness of families who may be going through this issue. And you're exactly right that sometimes families may put this on hold because you don't know what's going on, you know, in the loss of your family member, or even if an individual has been murdered, because sometimes, you know, in terms of our communication with the coroner, you know, the coroner might say one thing, but based on what you've seen or witnessed, you're thinking another thing. So this is a very complicated topic, however, very necessary, just because of the nature of who we are as Native people, and who have this this unique relationship with the federal government, in this case, the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And so I often say it's like this love-hate relationship that we have, you know, with the federal government, just simply because of our experiences. In this case with probate, but it could also be, you know, other areas that we might talk about, such as, you know, the boarding schools, which we've talked about previously. I do want to follow up on the one comment that you made about the Northwest Justice Project, and I did work with them when I worked in the superintendent's office several years ago, and continue to work with them. I want to highlight that they're going to be here working with elders here in Yakima. And so that meeting is going to be on August 4th, and you can call them to set up appointment about these kinds of issues. As a matter of fact, I just had a conversation with the state representative who I've been working with for several years on Native education. So I just want to share that phone number so people have it. Because once you said that, I thought, oh my goodness, Northwest Justice is going to be setting up appointments on this very topic. The phone number in Yakima is 574-4234. And again, that's 574-4234. They just recently established this office here in Yakima. I think it's part-time. However, the major office is in Seattle. So it's important to know these kinds of resources that are out there that can support family members in many ways, as you said, one being with wills and those kinds of things, which is important as well. And then also, I'm just thinking about the role of family in your families. You may have family members that are more willing to take on some of this type of work that needs to occur. I was going to say mundane work, but it needs to happen.
Yeah.
And I have a sister who was that individual who did all of that. And I'm so thankful for her, just, you know, like you and Robin, who worked together. And then the communication that podcast members have with you, because you need to have a support in whatever it is that you're doing with regard to probate. And just for your information and for our audience as well, I've been working with the National Indian Women's Resource Center, providing recommendations for family members to follow. And so this is one of those areas that, again, there's a need for family members to have an advocate. And so what we recommend is that they have a family member or a trusted friend that's willing to be there to support them through all of these steps. And one of those steps, of course, would be, you know, probate issues as well. And so this information, I think, is very, very timely for us to to have, and it could be very technical, and as we said at the beginning, very emotional at the same time. But I just like to, I think you said it correctly when this is information you didn't learn about. And I think that this is what we need to have more in-depth conversations about this, like we are here in this podcast, because I'm an educator and have been, teaching about, history and with teachers as well. And so this is one area that, I don't often get an opportunity to address, but if we really took a look at the whole role of being just Native, I was in a conversation just the other day saying when we're born, as Yakima or whatever we're born as a Native person, we are automatically born political. Just because of the nature of who we are as having this relationship with the federal government, and just a part of, not only the treaty, but our inherent rights, but also the role of the federal government in terms of the Constitution and various laws. And you brought up the one regarding the General Allotment Act, of 1867. But prior to that, we had the Indian Removal Act of 1830. So when we start thinking about, the intent of the government to remove us as people, to me, the issue that we're addressing with missing and murdered Indigenous women and people is also along that same line about continuing that removal, but in another form, with the murdering and the taking our family members and continuing to remove us. And so for me, that's a major issue. And so I'm glad that, that with your employment with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, that's something that you saw, because it's true, we do have to do our own education in many, many ways. So I was so pleased to hear you talk about this relationship that you've also built with the land. I just want people to know that our longhouse has gotten ready for our Huckleberry Feast, and so that's where I'm going. And so on Sunday we're going to have a drive-through feast in White Swan. So just want you to all know that, and about noon. But this relationship, I think, is important for us to continue addressing this unique relationship that we have, not only with the federal government, but also that relationship with the land. And so as you were talking, I was thinking for myself, I've had to really place my sister in terms of the land. For me, that's been healing to know that she is a part of the land, and that our land is very sacred. And I think that through policies like this, there's a whole educational process that, we need to share with one another. And because I just was at the longhouse, my first time I'd been to our longhouse since the pandemic, Tuesday evening, it was very healing for me. So thank you for sharing all of that with us. I was trying to think of the question, but every time I was coming up with a question, you were answering my question. So I was thinking about, this process and helping to make it easier for family. And so just this discussion has been also validating because of the technical aspects of dealing with allotment. When you're dealing with allotment, you're thinking about, the formal term estate of the land. You have to think, you have to go back and forth and think about, well, this is where the policy of assimilation is going on, is to assimilate me into this. But on the other hand, I'm saying, no, Huckleberry Feast. This battle goes on inside of you. And so I think I just want to say to the podcast team and Robin, this is a wonderful topic for us to be having with one another. And I'm sure once I'm done here, I'll have questions as well. But I just want to say thank you for the work that you do. It's important. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Yeah, and I wanted to touch base on like things I've learned outside of work on how, our, well, just mainly at the longhouse, how they say that we are born and then we go back to the land and we're reborn, into this earth again. And that's how I feel, is that we're literally tied to the land on paper and spiritually, mentally. I know when I go to the mountains and stuff, I feel so much better. Like there's more clarity when I come back. Yeah, I did like that though.
Yeah, I really appreciate that insight. I think having and hearing the dialogue between Patsy and Nicole just now just really is going to be informative for people and families that are in that dynamic and in that situation, in that waiting period. It just seems like there's a lot of grief that's
There is.
held in that process. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I want to just turn to back to our graph a little bit. And, you had sent a few of your talking points, and I want to kind of reflect on that. How long does it take? So we see, thank you, Robin, has pulled up the Department of Interior's probate process. There's 12 different steps. So for those of you that are unfamiliar with the federal government and our political status as Native Americans, American Indians, again, is still a term that we use because it's tied to the Constitution. It's tied to federal documents. So we still use American Indian, Alaska Native, even though we, prefer to identify by our tribal status. There's so many different steps that come in here. And so how long does it take?
Oh man, it's honestly every case within Indian country is different. Every single one. It can last like, I can't even say, but it's in the years, like years, 1 year to like, I've seen some to go within the probate process after they're submitted to the Office of Hearings and Appeals. It can last 4, 5, 6, 10 years, depending on the case and their situation, their heirs, their land. There's a bunch of different things that go into a probate case. Like there's claims, debt that people can file onto a probate case, and then there's also just the way us as Indian people live. Like we, like for adoptions, for example, that's one thing that I've noticed is also difficult, is when someone is adopted or they adopt children out, or they say, well, I adopted my niece or nephew, but there's no record of it. And just to verify things like that is hard, because a lot of the time when children were in the system before, like the I can't remember the name of it. It's the children, Indian Children,
Indian Child Welfare Act.
yeah, before that was implemented, a lot of children were lost in the system. So to try and track children down prior to that being implemented is a whole different monster in itself. But sometimes we do get information, but a lot of the times the state doesn't have records of it, or have records of the legal adoption or their name prior to that, or that's just one example that can hold up a case. And also you can appeal a case from a judge. So let's say my case that I submitted went to the judge. We had a probate hearing. The judge has to issue a probate order to all heirs or anyone that is listed as an interested party. And after that, you have 30 days from the date of the order to appeal it. If you don't agree with what the judge has written, you have that right to appeal. And this is one part I notice a lot of families aren't aware of, because they just like, okay, it's over, it's done. And then they sit and think about it later on, months after, and they're like, I don't agree with that. I don't think it should have went that way. Well, it's too late in this case, because you're off. It's step 9 on this flow chart. It says, after the judge's decision or on rehearing is issued, you have 30 days from the decision mailing date to file an appeal. And so with that being said, if there was no interested party filings as a request to an appeal, then the order stands. It will be as written. So that's number 10. And then the land will be updated according to the judge's decision. And there's basically no going back in a way. Families can file an appeal or reopening of the case based off of certain, if they feel like they have been, I guess, gypped, or they weren't an interested party to begin with, or something on legal terms that can reopen the case and the judge can look at it. But this is the very crucial part I like to tell people once they receive the decision for their loved one, is step 9 and 10 of this case. If they don't agree with what the judge has decided, they need to voice their opinion. And I feel like a lot of times they don't know where to turn. In my case, I have to be neutral. I can't help families based off of what they want to do. They just have to write into the judge's office. All the information are on the decisions. And that is one part I really wish people would look and read. I know a lot of legal terms for our Indian people are confusing. They like to be just black and white, or have someone interpret it to them. And I feel a lot of the legal language in these situations confuse people. It's almost like reading fine print when you sign, like buy a car or something, the fine print. That's kind of what it reminds me of. But these are the things that I wish people would have knowledge about. They can appeal. They have that right to voice their opinion, their concern to the judge. If not in the probate hearing, then in this appeal process.
It does, what you brought up about, people not agreeing with the decision and looking at the very, the graph and the process, it does make me think about family structures and how a federal government institution might have their views about how a family is structured compared to how we as natives structure our family, with adoptions or even stepchildren, people that might not be viewed that way. And then when you add the complexity of government oversight, for people that are non-native that have never had to deal with these kind of things, the federal government oversees a number of tribal decisions. They're at our government meetings that are actually closed door and we still vote by hand. I've been in court proceedings where this information has come up and people are like, that's only at those meetings. I'm like, the federal government can subpoena any of those records and they'll just read off what so-and-so saying and what so-and-so said. If they were mad about their, I don't want to give any specifics, but if they were mad about something, then that's read, and that's federal government has insight over that. They have insight over, I know we're talking about deaths and things like that, but people managing their land. So in a non-native environment, if you have land and you want to lease it to somebody for growing some plants or things like that for agriculture, that could be just directly, handled, maybe even through a real estate agent or something like that. But in Native and tribal communities, if having the trust land status, having that status means that you have a federal government oversight. And the complexity comes in is if there's multiple landowners on that acreage. Sometimes I'm not sure how many is who has the most landholders, but usually it's numerous family members that are involved in every single step of the decision along with the federal government. So I definitely agree that it seems complex. There's a number of steps, but it is also good to know, where the appeal process can come into play.
Yes.
I just want to open it up to my co-hosts for any additional insights, reflections, thoughts that are coming up.
I just have one, Nicole. I'm curious, in the work that's been going on with the missing and murdered Indigenous women and people, the issue of identity has been raised, and it's one that also we're looking at with students as well, Native students. How are you eligible for services? And I was glad that you touched on it a bit, but I'm curious what your experiences have been with Native identity and probate issues, because of course you've probably seen where Native women have been misclassified or misidentified, at their death. So I'm curious about probate kinds of issues as well. And I'm just going to give one. I'm just thinking about, because of the history of assimilation and also Allotment Act, etc. We have people who are listed maybe by such and such a name, when reality the family wants to set it straight, and this is how this person should be identified, and this is the name that we want. Have you seen that? And I'm curious about any experiences you've had with that.
I guess I personally haven't seen anything like that within my time working here, but I know that there has been cases as to where people get misidentified, or they use a different name and it's stuck with them. It's stuck with their case, and that they don't go by that anymore. I personally haven't touched on that yet, thankfully, because that'd be a whole different thing to deal with within the case.
Well, thank you, because that's just a conversation that I've been working on mainly with students, and then we get into child welfare and students you come across that are part of the foster care as well, and then
and they get different names,
right, and then they get misclassified by the system. All of these systems that are in place, which then become barriers. And so the intent of this podcast is to help families, through some of these processes as well. So just want to say thank you for the work that you've been doing. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Patsy.
Lucy or Robin?
Got anything, Lucy? I was going to ask a more general question. Okay. So as was mentioned before, you are a very big true crime fan or true crime enthusiast. And I just wanted to know,
yes,
kind of like, what do you listen to, as well as have you ever seen any overlap in being an informed true crime enthusiast and your job or anything like that? Have you seen any overlaps?
I listen to My Favorite Murder, and that's part of I think it's Karen Kilgariff and Georgia Hardstark. They're two comedians actually that are into true crime, and I've been listening to them for at least 3 years. And then there's another one, gosh, it's a part of their network, but their first season was a MMIW case. And there's a couple more. I can't remember the names of them. I'll have to just send you guys my library of podcasts I listen to. But they do all, there's another podcast. They do the south or the northeast region of missing people in general, murdered and missing people in general. That's a pretty good one too. But each season is a certain case, one case at a time. And I've been reading that on podcasts, they issue a case out, and the listeners actually have solved cases for those people that are missing or murdered. They have solved cases just based off of following their podcasts. And I think that's amazing. I really like that. And this is totally off topic, but I went to school at the University of Idaho for chemistry. I wanted to be a tribal coroner, so our tribal communities don't have to go through county coroners, and they could have their own within the reservation, because we know the importance of having our family members back to us within a certain amount of time. You know, we're on a clock, as they say, as Yakima people, we're on a clock after we pass away. And I noticed that based off of situations on murdered persons, they don't comply with that because the law, government or the state law comes first, and they have to do all of their own things. But that's one thing I've always wanted to be, was a coroner. And I think that is pretty radical for, someone just to say out loud. I've noticed a couple times I've said that out loud to elders, and they told me, you're a woman, Indian women or Indian people aren't supposed to touch bodies. You should think about that. And I felt discouraged, honestly, when I just wanted to help. I know that's totally off topic, but that's one thing I just wanted to share about myself.
We are all about random insight and information. Again, the setup for this podcast was, let's just pretend we're like at a diner and everybody gets to be like a fly on the wall.
Oh, nice. Okay,
yeah, so
there
that's
we go.
kind of our feeling. Yeah, so bring it up if it's relevant.
Right.
I don't know if there's any national native corners. Do any tribes have corners? Real quickly before
I know Comanches, they have their own funeral home, but I don't know if they work with the county coroner or, stuff like that. I'm not 100% sure.
Okay. So we have a dream job disclosure. I mean, there's certainly tribal people, Yakima people that are doctors. So I think that there's definitely protocols that it seems like that could be implemented, alongside all of that information. So as I close this out, I want to read a quote from the Bureau of Indian Affairs.gov, which is a guide to help American Indians and Alaska Natives understand the Department of Interior's probate process. Again, Nicole has described how complex all this different information can be. So we want to make sure that you have a resource to go to, a place to go to reference all the different steps. So when American Indian or Alaska Native passes away, and own trust or restricted lands and or trust funds at the time of death, there must be a way of transferring the trust lands or funds to the deceased person's heirs or to whoever is to take ownership under the terms of a will. The Office of Hearings and Appeals will determine what trust lands funds the deceased person owned, determine the deceased person's legal heirs or devisees, and order distribution of the trust or restricted land or funds to the appropriate persons. Again, that's a lot of information. That's why we're so glad to have Nicole here with us to give us more insight, more conversational aspects of, this information. Again, I'm Emily Washings, my co-hosts, Robin Pebeahsy, Lucy Smartlowett, Patricia Whitefoot, and along with guest Nichole Pebeahsy, who also designed the shirt I'm wearing and Robin's wearing, and Patsy and Lucy. Our podcast can be streamed at numerous places. Thank you to everybody on YouTube that's watching live and to those that will be listening later. These are edited and produced by Robin Pebeahsy. Logo by John Olney Schellenberger with Native Anthro. And music by Lee Sekekwaptiwa.